you, Chairman Klinkish, and all the committee members for the opportunity to testify. The Chairman has mentioned, I'm Dr. Robert Golden. I'm the Dean of the School of Medicine and Public Health, and also the Vice Chancellor of Medical Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I want to make it really clear that we strongly support efforts to eliminate any profiteering from the sale of fetal material, including strict enforcement of the federal laws that are already in place and serve us well. But we must be careful that we do not create new state laws that depart from national standards and best practices, and in doing so, destroy our state's biomedical research environment. This is incredibly important because there is incredibly important, potentially life-saving research conducted here in Wisconsin that relies on fetal material that is received from federally licensed and regulated supply tissue banks. Now, from an earlier era, the development of the polio vaccine would not have happened. This is a time of year when children would be dying, becoming crippled, without the available access to fetal tissue. Now, today, going forward, on our campus alone, cancers, including lymphomas, stomach cancer, throat cancer, and other diseases have active NIH-supported labs working on promising new treatment approaches. All of this will stop like this if this bill is passed. Now, in some cases, it is true that some of these projects can use cells that were derived some time ago from fetal tissue, so-called cell lines. But in many other projects, new cells are necessary for scientific reasons that we would be happy to explain. Alternative methods are used whenever possible, but now we still need new cells and fetal tissues, including thymus gland and liver, in order to continue with highly promising avenues of scientific research. The development and use of life-saving treatments will be shut down in Wisconsin if the proposed legislation, even with amendments that we have been told about but have not been invited to participate in, pass. Researchers, both public and private, who use fetal tissue or cells will be considered criminals, and this life-saving research would come to a complete abrupt stop in Wisconsin with a devastating effect on our state's capacity to attract and retain biotechnology. At the University of Wisconsin-Madison alone, approximately $76 million in external federal funding is supporting about 100 labs whose work relies on these materials. In fiscal year 2015, that just ended for us, those labs collectively employ over 1,400 people. These scientists will leave as soon as they can for other states, taking with them not only their grants that support research that uses fetal tissue, not only the $76 million in those grants, but their other grants and their collaborating fellow scientists. Our Comprehensive Cancer Center, the only one in the state of Wisconsin, will be at a huge competitive disadvantage when we go in for our competitive renewal of our core federal NIH grant, since admittedly is small, but a very key important part of the Cancer Center's research portfolio depends on the availability of fetal tissue. But I want to make one point clear. This is not simply about the economic impact, as damaging as that will be for the citizens of our state. What it's really about is the unnecessary halt of vitally important research that has the potential to save countless lives. This research focuses on a wide variety of serious illnesses, including Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, asthma, diabetes, epilepsy, heart disease, and in fact today you will hear from one of our patients about her personal and family experience with that category of illness. Infectious bacterial and viral diseases, immune system disorders such as rheumatoid arthritis, and future vaccine development. Cells and tissues derived from fetal material are now used by virtually every major medical research institution in the United States. There has been some incredibly misleading misinformation about this, which I would like to begin now and continue later to clarify. Several comments have been made very recently, including some in this past weekend's newspapers, that the proposed legislation would not hurt Wisconsin, since similar laws are in place in other states. Illinois was highlighted. I think we have clarified today, although I didn't follow all the legal nuances of the debate, but we have clarified today that that Illinois statute has been found to be unconstitutional, and the general public did not have the benefit of the clarification that took here today. So I hope that all of us, in our passion to advance our beliefs, keep to the truth and to accuracy. And it is disingenuous at best to say other states are doing this without any problem, when in fact, all of the constitutional challenges have been upheld as these laws being unconstitutional. And there is not, to my knowledge, not as a lawyer, there has not been a single case where a challenge of the constitutionality of these laws has been overturned. And yet, we read in the newspapers comments by proponents saying this is not a big deal because this is happening in a lot of other states, when in fact it is not happening because of the unconstitutionality of the approach. This proposed law, in its current form, and even with the amendments to the extent that they have been shared with our university, will shut down promising lines of research in Wisconsin. It will cut off work in our state on diseases that cripple and kill children and adults. The cells that might have provided a pathway to a cure will be simply discarded. People who need effective treatments will go without help or even hope. Now, I want to stress again that federal laws strictly regulate the distribution and use of fetal tissue. We should aggressively enforce the federal regulations that are already in place to ensure that there is no profiteering in Wisconsin from the sale of fetal tissues, and that the highest standards are applied to the review and use of fetal tissues in biomedical research, when other alternative methods just aren't feasible at this point in time. But we must not shut down research through the imposition of a state law that goes far beyond federal law and imposes criminal penalties on scientists who are conducting carefully reviewed research in our state. Speaker Robin Vos wrote in an op-ed this weekend that, quote, "Working with the authors, we will assure the citizens of Wisconsin that this legislation will not have a negative impact on important research," end of quote. We applaud his approach to this issue, and I publicly pledge our enthusiastic support to work with him, to work with you, to work with all of your colleagues in finding a way forward that will address the important underlying issues without destroying important life-saving research programs. So I want to thank you again for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the countless patients and future patients in our state whose lives will depend on our ongoing biomedical research. Thank you.
Thanks for your testimony, Doctor. Is the UW currently testing on tissue obtained from an abortion?
The university has many federally reviewed and funded programs that rely on the availability of tissues and materials that are distributed through, in our case, 4 licensed federal facilities under very strict federal regulations. 3 of those facilities are embedded within universities. One in New York State, the other 2 are on the West Coast. There is one freestanding tissue bank that some of our scientists also use, and I am not as familiar with that one as with the other 3.
Today, currently, across the street, are there scientists using aborted fetal tissue for testing?
I would say, I am proud to say that across the street, there are dedicated scientists who are developing promising new approaches to treating cancer that are dependent on the availability of fetal cells and fetal tissues. That's a public record that we are proud of.
So is the
and
answer
in every
yes?
instance, we follow all of the highest ethical standards as determined by peers and ethicists in the field and the federal government.
So in other words, yes, there is testing going on right now at
There is
UW.
research going on.
There's research going
Yes,
on right
that
now
depends on those
using
materials.
tissue from aborted fetuses.
Well, as I mentioned earlier on, there is $76 million of NIH grants supporting peer-reviewed, ethically reviewed research. And we are proud of that research that is going on and hopeful that all of us in the room will have the opportunity to benefit from it, as everyone in this room has benefited from the polio vaccine. That would not have been created if this law was in effect.
Doctor, do you support future procurement of new fetal tissue for research?
I enthusiastically support using every legal reviewed process that we can to try to find a cure for Alzheimer's disease and for cancer. Always following the best practices and national standards, yes.
Can you tell me the origin of the fetal tissue that is being used for research at the UW right now?
The origin of the material is from one of the 4 federally licensed tissue banks that serve to supply federally funded investigators with those materials that they need to conduct their peer-reviewed research. Those are what we get them from. We do not receive tissues from abortion clinics. We receive our tissues from federally licensed, publicly transparent tissue banks, similar to what the process is like for other types of organ procurement for other purposes.
To the best of your knowledge, where from the fetus was this tissue obtained? Is it spinal tissue? Is it kidney tissue, liver tissue?
I think it depends, depending on the project, and the projects evolve and change over time. So I can't say for sure exactly which cells are used in the $76 million research portfolio, but they come from a variety of sources, in some cases cells, in other cases tissue slices. Similar to what we use in procuring tissue that has been donated by adult subjects as well.
I don't have to tell you, as a doctor, as a scientist, these issues do become ethical issues. Part of the tightrope that's being walked right now is the fact that there is a school of thought that what's being tested on is tissue, material, slices. And the other school of thought is that it's babies. And the bottom line, when you talk about the multi-millions of dollars of research, there's a school of thought that believes that that's needed, and there's a school of thought that believes that babies are more important than money. So I think fundamentally, while philosophies differ, I want to make it clear to you that my office has been open and met with folks from BioForward, and we have moved further toward the research and than the original bill that was put forward. And I would encourage you, and I would hope, and my question to you is, are you willing to continue that dialogue despite the divergent philosophies?
We are eager to begin a dialogue. To this point, we have not been allowed into most of the discussions that were referred to today. Excuse me?
I said that's not true as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I can say with
And chair of
absolute
the committee.
certainty, I have not had access to any of the discussions, despite my best efforts. But in response to your thoughtful question, I want to make it clear, we are eager to find a way forward. I think there is much that we agree on. Profiteering must not take place. We can agree on that. Our state should follow the very best practices of our nation. I'm sure you and I will agree on that. But our state should not become such an extreme outlier that our citizens are denied the opportunity to have access to groundbreaking research right here. I also want to make it clear, in response to a part of your question, I believe, This is not about the money. I wish we could conduct this research without NIH funding, but it's not about the money. It's about the science. It's about medicine. It's about preventing disease. It's about saving lives. Is there anyone in this room whose life has not been touched by a family member with Alzheimer's disease? It's all about making sure that our children don't have to take care of us with dementia the way many of us in this room are struggling to take care of our parents. That's what it's all about. It's not the money. Others can discuss the economics. I did bring it up because in the context of earlier discussions, I wanted to give some facts that are checked and accurate. But it's all about life-saving research. And I think there is much ground that we can agree on, even as we will continue to disagree on some other aspects.
Let me
And
ask
we
you
want
a-
to work with you together.
Let me ask you a logistical question. You say that you do not support in any way procurement, profiteering from procurement, correct? How do you make sure that doesn't happen? When you have, we just had testimony that it costs approximately $3, maybe $4 to freeze and ship baby parts, but they were getting paid $200 under current testimony, going by the current testimony. How do you propose that's even possible to say trading is okay, but charging for it is not? How do you propose to regulate that?
Well, first let me say that I don't know how accurate that anecdote is, okay? But to your point of your question, I have confidence in our country's and our state's ability to enact sensible legislation and to enforce it, at times imperfectly. We know that laws are broken. We know that sometimes criminals get off for whatever reason. But 99% of the time, democracy works. Law enforcement works. We find ways forward to advance civilization, to promote health and protect human life without violating ethical guidelines. And quite frankly, I think while we welcome the political discussion of what could be incredibly damaging current proposals, much of this discussion needs to include the actual content experts from science and from ethics. The language and simplifications, and at times, I'm afraid to say, misrepresentations do not help advance the common cause that you and I both believe in. So we have to stick to the facts, avoid distortions and innuendos and inaccuracies. And I really believe in this country's approach, and I am confident that we can come up with meaningful legislation similar to what has been enacted at the federal level that will allow us to advance health and science and at the same time protect our core values.
One final question. What would happen to your research if women quit having abortions?
It would have a substantial negative impact on our capacity to do the life-saving research that we are doing.
Representative Kramer.
Thank you, Doctor. You said, quote, "the federal laws in place are serving us well," end quote. And I would have to disagree, and I think there's a reason that we're doing this as a state. We're taking the ethical high road in Wisconsin. We have a right as a state to ensure that we are doing what is right in our state also. I don't trust this DOJ, federal DOJ. I want to make sure that we can also make certain that everything is done that should be done ethically in all our bioscience research in Wisconsin. That being said, these federally regulated tissue banks, the 4 tissue banks you discussed, are any of those tissue banks, does any of that tissue come from some of these groups that were in the videos that just came out recently, the Advanced Bioscience Resources or STEM Express that you're aware of?
I have no way of knowing that.
Okay. And these tissue banks, do you know where these tissue banks get their tissue from?
No, I don't. I know the federal government knows, but I don't know.
Okay, so it just kind of arrives and everyone's fine with that.
I'm sure it doesn't just kind of arrive. There are regulations in place, but
I
I am
mean-
not a content
Okay.
expert on that.
I mean, I'll quote, there was a doctor years ago who said, those brains, he quote, "those brains offered wonderful material of mentally poor deformities, early childhood diseases, And of course I accepted brains. It really wasn't my concern where they came from and how they were brought to me. That was a doctor at the Nuremberg trials. So I guess this makes me sick that this is going on. To end lives, to save lives. It just baffles me. Is there any research that the UW considers unethical?
Absolutely. We
Okay.
have tight ethical guidelines, which follow, by the way, the Nuremberg Code that you referred to, which all of our scientists are required to be familiar with.
Okay. Yeah. That's fine. That's good. Thank you.
Representative